So, what makes a good game?
You gotta have the. That's when you really are start cooking with fire. Alternate universes, time travel, bending reality. For years, I've made horrible games at Game Jam. There are parallel universes, and we can just move between them at any time.
So, Kobey Myhre, you are a game designer at Cat Daddy Games, and you've developed a couple of games on your own. Thank you so much for being here, and welcome to the show.
Yeah, no, excited to be here. I'll talk about whatever my little game history is, to whatever degree it is.
Yeah, absolutely. So what makes a good game?
There's a lot of different things. Games come down to a ton of stuff. I think if you boil it down to very simple things, a good thing to do is the easy to learn, hard to master. That's a great thing of chess. It's only 10 little pieces. You got to learn what they do or whatever. I don't even know if it's 10. I might have that off. I don't play a lot of chess, but if you take chess, very simple game to just learn how all the pieces move, but then there's so much depth to the game that you can play it over and over and over and over and over again.
Okay.
So I think replayability is a big thing with games. You can make big narrative or story or experience-driven games, but those don't have a lot of replayability. They're good as standalone little experiences, but as far as games go, I like to make more things that, will stand the test of time, or not even that, but just, have a lot of replayability to them so that players can get engaged and really dive into it. So many different aspects to games, but I think the easy to learn, hard to master is a good place to start. And yeah, I don't focus on the experience games as much as more I care about gameplay a lot. I don't think graphics or how the game looks or the storytelling can be a good driver, but I played a lot of games that are really ugly, that are really fun. There was this one game me and my buddy played growing up. It's called Zombie Estate. It was on the Microsoft store for 50 Microsoft points, which is 50 cents.
Sure, yeah.
So you had to buy $5 to Microsoft points so you could buy this game for 50 cents. But it was a little top-down shooter, little pixel art, 16-bit characters. But you just played waves and waves and waves against the zombies. It'd go up to wave 500. It was a super fun game. Had a bunch of random characters for no reason. They didn't do anything, but they're 16-bit characters, so it's easy to crank out a bunch of them. So that was a really fun game that you don't need high-end graphics or big budgets. So if you have a fun premise, I think that can get very far in a game. And pretty games are nice, and good story is nice, but that's all kind of extra in my field, or in my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, I think you hit the nail on the head there. The gameplay loop is probably the most important thing, because I don't know about you, when I was young, my teenage, middle school, teenage years, so we'll date it and say mid 2000s, early 2010s, I would play hours and hours of games on newgrounds.com or Miniclip, just really shitty flash games where the quality was honestly terrible. The gameplay was meh, but the gameplay loop felt really, really good with upgrades and progressions and all that other stuff.
Yeah. No, that's the best thing of I think if anywhere if you want to start with a game, find the core loop that's fun, and then add the little layers of progression and mastery and depth to it that can kind of add all the extra stuff. But
so for people listening, what would you describe a gameplay loop as?
The gameplay loop is just what the player is doing most of the time. That you're you might have a crafting game, a survival game or something.
Yeah.
So the loop that is I go punch a tree and I get wood. I go punch a rock and I get stones, and then I use that to make a thing. And I just do that over and over. I'm punching trees for woods. I'm punching rocks for stone, and I'm making things. There's a bunch of different variations off of that. So I'm doing the game loop in different ways, but that's the core thing. And that's where in that kind of game you need to focus on, it's got to be fun to hit the tree and get the wood.
Yeah.
So whatever you can do of punch the tree, play a particle effect, have a little wood graphic come up on the screen, have a fun sound effect, all that kind of stuff. You want that wood gathering to be very nice. Even Minecraft is very,
right, yes.
Punching wood is stupid of an idea, kind of is video games. But that's what I like about video games. Video games can have stupid ideas. I think that's even a good premise with video games of have a dumber idea, alternate universes, time travel, bending reality. Where if you could put that in your game, we always had a rule, the rule of cool, which has no bearing or no actual philosophy to it. It just goes, if it's cool, put it in the game, no matter what.
Sure.
And so the rule of cool breaks physics and reality and whatever. But you go, if it's cool, let's do it, because video games don't have to be real.
Yeah,
they're
absolutely.
supposed to be fun, so that's what you should strive for.
I mean, just look at Goat Simulator, right? It's just a goat running around doing crazy things. There's, I think, demon goats in there too, but it's the fun gameplay loop. It's, suspending reality and going to go do cool stuff.
Yes, no, they just made a crazy goat physics body interesting character controller, and then they made an interesting level around it because they were like, oh, we made a goat, and it's fun to run around and jump as this goat. Okay, let's give it like a playground to run around and jump in. And then they're like, oh, okay, well now we need goals as a goat. Why are we jumping around and playing in the playground? So they give you little like mini game things to go get or score or whatever. And yeah, that makes like a good game. It fights the AAA people if they're like, what the fuck? Why is there a dumb physics simulated goat in like a shitty made level? Like, why is this game doing so well? But it is just fun. You don't have to go like big budget and cinematic and what, game. I think game loop first is the best way to make a game. If you want to make an experience, that's something different. You can make those kind of games, but I want to make, a game. Then like Goat Simulator, you can just chuck on and run around as a goat for like 2 hours and like have some fun.
Yeah. Whenever I think about like games and budgets, I look at like, the big AAA games like, oh, we sunk about $400 million into this, and we're getting beat out by Stardew Valley, one developer in a garage for 10 years.
Yeah, no, the most recent one of that, I think Manor Lords was a solo developer, and that one pops pretty good, at least in the like strategy community. But no, I read an interesting guy's take on the corporate game dev industry of their budgets are getting so big and so big and so big that they have to make these gianter projects, and with those giant projects, they need so much money in return, so that there's so much like stress on these projects.
Yeah.
Which they're not really like doing that well. I mean, AAA games have not been thriving over the past 2 years.
Yeah.
Indie and AA, that kind of sphere has been doing much well, which I think it is. They're either focusing more on the core loop and going with good projects, or, I think AAA needs to just kind of budget down the budget and make like 3 games and see which one works and then run with that.
Yeah.
Because they're all trying to do these like live service models and all these extra monetizations, and like that stuff is all fine, and you can put that in games to a degree. It pisses off a ton of people when it comes out launch day and everything's broken.
Yep.
But like, let's take like Vermintide 2, for example. Vermintide 2 has been doing very well, but their other game, Darktide, did horrible. Very bad launch. Came out with a in-app purchase store and cosmetics and whatnot, but just a clunky game. I think like Vermintide 2 now has a space like they could add that, battle pass, cosmetic stuff into their game because they've been around long enough. And they've, planted their flag to a degree.
Right.
But Darktide comes out with that kind of stuff, but it wasn't ready to do that. So I think games, or at least AAA games, I would like them, or this might be a way for them to fix their things, of like divvy up their budgets into multiple projects, and one hits, turn it into these live service games that everyone's striving for, like League of Legends, Hearthstone, World of Warcraft, or the thing that keeps everyone around and has that higher than a $60 price tag because of the multi-interactions or multiple payments you're doing within the game. But I think that might shake up the industry a little bit if they were to try that. Because, I think if you do smaller budget games, find what hits, and then turn that into your Warframe or your League of Legends or your Dota or whatever your, what's the other one? Blizzard.
Legends of the Storm? No, that's
Heroes of the Storm. Overwatch. Overwatch. I'm like, all these things want to be like those kind of games, but I don't know. You can't launch with that because that's something you really need to like build, I think, or I don't know. They need to make a different approach because AAA is not doing well.
No, absolutely. So what kind of things do you see for the indie game scene? Like, I think a lot more tools are getting created. AI is a thing. I feel like being an indie game developer is now easier than ever.
Yes, it is definitely easier than ever. Like, I'm enticed by like, there's even all the online contracting stuff you can do. Like, if you're a programmer and you know how to work in your engine, I mean, the sky's your limits as far as Unity blocks and spheres go. But that doesn't, it's not that you... I did say earlier, graphics aren't the most important in games, but they are relevant. I do agree that, you shouldn't throw them out the window of like, we can talk about Dungeon Real's tactics later, but like one of the downfalls of that game was that my art budget was 0 again. So I made a game that wasn't the prettiest, but was the best I could do, but hopefully mechanically good.
Yeah.
But like, you do want to have some sort of art budget. I just would argue, if the gameplay sucks and the art's great, game no good. If the gameplay is great and the art's bad, game can still be good. And then I forgot where that question was going.
No worries. Actually, let's go into that. So one of your previous games was Dungeon Real's Tactics. What is the inspiration behind it? How does it work?
Yes. So I made a game beforehand called Dungeon Reels for mobile, which these were all little small. I was just coming out of school when I was making these games, or Dungeon Reels Tactics came a little bit later. Sure. But Dungeon Reels was pretty rough in its, birth or whatever, but people did like it. It was basically a game like Slay the Spire. Everyone was cloning that game and making card building deck types of roguelike kind of things. And I just took that same kind of formula, but instead of a deck of cards, you build a slot machine. So you would draft a slot machine, you get a basic slot machine of like strikes and defends. Your slot machine spins every turn, and whatever comes up, those are the abilities you get to build. And then you can go through a dungeon and try to add better spells into your slot machine and get the bad spells out of your slot machine. And that game did pretty well, but I only had a small amount of time to work on it. I only worked on it for probably about 4 months in total, and then got a little bit of dev time for about 2 more months after it shipped, but it was a kind of weird schedule, and again, very low art budget. Oh,
that's good art. She wants to be a part of the show.
Yes, Dungeon Reels, that was the kind of setup for Dungeon Reels, and it did well, but I didn't get a lot of time to work on it. Yeah. So I went and was working in the industry for a bit and wanted to go make another game, so I wanted to make Dungeon Reels Tactics, which was a mix of, I wanted to do Dungeon Reels again, and I still want to make Dungeon Reels 2, so that's a future project that might happen, but I wanted Dungeon Reels Tactics to kind of be like not a sequel to Dungeon Reels, but like an offshoot of it. Okay. I like some of the mechanics I did, but I wanted to change some stuff. And I was very hooked on Divinity, Original Sin 2. Okay. Those are one of my favorite kind of games. I love like tactical party-based RPGs. Divinity, Baldur's Gate 3, Dragon Age, all the Dragon Age games back in the day. Those were all great. So I wanted to make a game like that, which was kind of like, I really just wanted to make a game. I kind of wanted to make a game that made money, but I just wanted to make the game I wanted to make. So I went from like, I'm just going to shove Divinity and Dungeon Reels together and see what pops out. And so what it turned out was similar idea of you have these slot machines that have all these spells and that determines your like movements every turn. But I had a bunch of pre-built characters in the game. So I wanted to, instead of drafting the spells in your slot machine, I wanted you to draft the characters in your party instead. Because I also had this fun idea. This was more like back in school of the like, I wanted to build like top-down shooters or some sort of like party-based. It was more supposed to be like a co-op game. But one way you can like kill off the characters and make that an interesting mechanic of I wanted like it I had like fond memories of like playing Gears of War back in the day. And me and my dad would play it in like campaign. And he played as the main character Marcus and I played as Dom. And at some point in the story, this is a spoiler, sorry if you haven't played Gears of War, here's a spoiler. But Dom dies at some point. And you have to play as a different character. And I was like, no.
Devastated.
I was devastated. Dom died. I'd been playing him for multiple games. I had to go switch to some Carmine fucker with some helmet that didn't matter. And I was like, oh, fucking. And I loved that feeling of like playing Gears of War and playing as that second character and having them die and be like, no, I had to stick that. So I had some like top-down shooter game I wanted to make, but I don't bring that. So I wanted to kind of bring that into Dungeon Reels Tactics of a way that you're still doing that roguelike experience of, you know, trials and tribulations, trying to move through a map and, you know, harder and harder difficulty. So I wanted a system where, like, I could kill off these characters in that, like, yes, you have a party of 4, but I wanted it, like, you should have to have 8 to 12 different party members throughout the full campaign. And so that was kind of the idea of the game. So each character has their own pre-built slot machine, and each combat, you roll the slot machine, and you get to use your abilities for free. So each character has their own little strategy to it, but it was a little bit long for a roguelike game. The campaigns were a little long. I tried to do puppet shows. Well,
I thought it was cute.
The puppet shows were kind of cute. I tried to do writing. I'm not a writer. I'm not going to try writing again. We'll have ChatGPT do that next time or something. I'll have him write some puppet shows. But it was kind of fun doing the puppet show process. I think I did write 200 plus puppet shows for that game, which is really stupid. And I love how the puppet shows got into that game in that. So like I said, my art budget was low. I used this free art asset pack that I used for Dungeon Reels, and I did again for Dungeon Reels Tactics. But I get a little creative of having to do 3D environments, so interesting like tech art stuff on that.
For those listening, what do you mean by puppet shows? For those who haven't played the game.
Oh yes, okay, that's no. So yeah, I put puppet shows in Dungeon Reels Tactics, and how that came about is since I had a low art budget, all my art was just a bunch of 2D sprites, but I had a semi 2.5D game, sort of 3D game. But I had these little 2D cutscene puppet show kind of things. And what I wanted to do is when I was making the game, like I was saying, I want the character to be like tied to their party members, but I want to kill the party members. I want them to die. So the player feels that and has to get more, but same like Darkest Dungeon kind of thing. You know, your people are going to buy, but they're a resource. So use them and, you know, use them to complete the game. But then I was finding, you know, since I didn't have, you know, 3D models or a lot of like, there wasn't a lot to the characters. They were just a name and a color and the same kind of sprite over and over. So I had to bring some life to them to like, why do you care about this generic warrior character? Why do you care about this generic mage character or whatever? And so I was like, oh, what if I use little puppet shows to like tell a story? And because they're 2D sprites, I could just put them on like a little stick and they're easy to animate. I don't need like voice acting or animating or 3D models. Like you can just put a 2D sprite on a little stick and it looks like a puppet.
Yeah.
And you do little puppet shows. So that was a cute little fun mechanic. And yeah, I was proud of that one. Added some life to the characters so that if there's a funny puppet show that you saw with one character and you were investing heavily in that character, as your highest level one, and then you're like, oh no, they die. Like hopefully you get that like, emotion. Like there's another thing about making video games. It's weird to like trying to craft certain emotions from the video game is a higher level thing, but that's what you ultimately need to start thinking about at some point of the like, what emotion am I trying to evoke from the player with all these mechanics and features I'm trying to do?
I mean, how difficult do you think that is? Is it more story and, dialogue and narrative to create those emotions? Is it situations that you create for that? Is it, animations on screen and effects? Like what kind of balance do you consider when making those things?
I think it's definitely we get more into the art and story side of things, which I said are maybe less important, but are maybe more important for capturing those emotions, but you need the gameplay to kind of set up the scenario in a way like you were talking about. So you do want to build that scenario of the like, oh, I want to kill a player off or I want to kill a character off in the game. And I want to evoke an emotion from the player and I don't want them to be like, this game fucking sucks. I love that character. Like, it's hard to like kill a character in a game. So you got to think about it of like, okay, I do want to kill this character because I want to make that emotional response, but you need to tie other things into it of like, I need to be invested in Dom. They can't just kill off a Carmine in Gears of War.
Course.
Because I don't care. They all wear helmets. They are the grunts. You can kill off the grunts. But when you make a character significant, you'll get more of that emotional response from killing them off, but you need to make sure you do it in the proper way. Because I would argue maybe Gears of War. Like I was upset that Dom died in Gears of War, and it definitely didn't enhance the story or game. I mean, enhance the story, but like didn't improve the gameplay in any ways. But I still like the Gears of War games, so I still talk around for that. So that is more of if you're making games for that experience and you want to tell a story. You don't want to have that experience of like, the tragedy of a death in a story. I'm not a writer, so I don't know much about making those story arc kind of things, but they do help for the more the experience of the game. And that's when you get more to like AAA games or both that experience and gameplay loop. Ideally, like you want to kind of meld the two. Sometimes they sit in their own islands based on the game. You can have more experience-based games. You can have more game loop-based games, but like roguelikes are very down to the game loop. Story, you could argue Hades kind of melds the two both very well. That's maybe why they probably had the most success out of like a roguelike. But, Slay the Spire, very weak in story and art, but very good game loop, very good, compelling just mechanics. So trying to build Slay the Spire into an experience would be a different, that would probably, excel it. I don't know if that's what they're doing for Slay the Spire 2, but
no idea.
Trying to blend that experience and game loop is probably that's when you really start cooking with fire if you're making a game. Once you got a good game loop and you got a good experience that you can meld them together, that's rare and that's hard to find, but that's what we're looking for.
Okay, cool. So how does someone go about like actually making a game? Because I know some programming. I went to school for, I have a computer engineering degree. I know the components of a game. You need good story. You need, good, decent art assets. You need, a physics engine. You have, these various components, but I have no idea how to actually get started. Like what step one looks like.
That is the thing they say, like, finishing the game is one of the hardest parts, too, of like, because that's one thing. Video games are long projects with a lot of stuff. I mean, it's not like painting. It's not like photography. It's not like pottery. It's a big thing to make a video game. Even if you want to do it yourself. I mean, those stories of like the Stardew Valley guy. It was like a 5-year project. Now, there's always whenever someone's doing a video game by themselves, they're probably not working on it, 40 hours a week straight all the time. They've got a side project, this is why you got to fund the video game and you got to fund yourself. You can live on top ramen and make a video game, but that is still a tricky component to get one shipped. At least how you learn to make video games. I went to a trade school for it and was actually like very bad at programming. I failed programming in community college and decided I'd go try and become a video game programmer. And my school, when I was trying to get in, luckily they had a low requirement for entry, but they're like, well, you're good at math and science, but you failed programming in college already. So we're kind of iffy about you, but I graduated valedictorian. So I learned
good for you.
The trade school model was very good for learning how to programming because just reading like C++ primer for dummies and like trying to teach yourself C++ with a book, that's rough. You really need
it's hard.
You need like a programmer that knows what they're doing that can walk you through the dumb red squigglies that are all over your project, or even getting to advanced stuff like, getting source libraries hooked up in your C++ project, or different add-ons and component. Like, you can get really into the weeds with programming of more like, I don't have much of like a computer science degree. I don't really know much about how computers work. I don't know what a computer virus is. I don't exactly know how processors work. I know how to code. I know how to like code a video game, which I'm more kind of like, I wouldn't call myself much of a C++ backend, server engine kind of guy. I'm more of a scripter, maybe. That's what they might, it's a kind of, I think, a derogatory term. But, yeah, you work a lot in Unity, so just C# scripting. Okay. I know the back end of how to do all that stuff in C++ and C#, but when it's all there, I mean, the tools, you can do custom engine stuff nowadays, but I don't think it's very worth it. Like, the tools with Unity and Unreal are getting so good nowadays. And with the price they might take from your profits or whatever, it's still good with all the tools they offer you. Sure. I mean, like, Unity just has analytics out of the box. All right, you want to make your own analytics platform? Like, no, there's add-ons and tools you can buy for that. So you can definitely scrape a custom engine together, but I think the current tools are pretty good.
So would you just start in Unity and be like, okay, they have this template that's fairly close to the thing that I want to make, and then you start with that and just start like tweaking things to get a little closer to your vision?
That can be a way to like start learning. That's one thing of like, if you really want to make a game, it is hard to like Unreal Engine, like you can download Unreal Engine and they got all these like starter projects. They've got the shooter starter project, they got the platformer starter project. Now you can take those and start like messing around and make your own like little video game. But I would call that more you're learning how to make like, you're in the early stages. You're making this video game for yourself. You're not trying to release this thing. Like, you can't take an Unreal starter project and launch that on Steam one day. Like, you can. People have done that. But I wouldn't advise it. Of like, when you really need to get into games, or if you really want to get into making games, you got to make a lot of them. And that's one thing I was lucky. Like, my school was like a trade school, and we made just a lot of games in class, or like every assignment we did was make a video game. Okay. So we made a lot of bad video games, and you got to get the bad ones out because it takes a while. Like, there was some saying I heard, like, most indie games, like, there's 11 projects behind Flappy Birds that didn't do well. Not Flappy Birds, Angry Birds.
Sure.
Like, there are 11 projects before Angry Birds that was coming, Rovio. Like, they have other shipped games that you can look up, and they did not do anywhere near Angry Birds did. Fully released mobile titles, but that's what it takes sometimes. That's kind of back to the AAA route of like, you really got to make a bunch and see what kind of catches fire. Of like, it took me a while even making games to learn how it works. I went to school for programming, and very shortly into my programming school, I was like, oh, I'm very bad at game design. I'm not supposed to do this. So I would tell my friends I'd make games with, I go, cut me out of the process. I'm a code monkey. I don't want any part of the game design process. Just tell me what you want. So I didn't even touch game design for a while. It only was once I made enough games that were even, my buddy's idea that I was on a project with, or other people's idea, or maybe some sort of collaborative thing. But it took a lot of games to figure out what worked and what didn't. And a good example I have of like, we made this game called Ghost Hunt. It's Pac-Man with shotguns. And in the early thing, it was like a Pac-Man-like map. And each character spawns in the corner, and it's a top-down shooter, local co-op. Okay. And what we did was you'd run into the map, and you'd kill these ghosts, and you collect souls. And then if someone shot you, you drop all your souls, so it's like a headhunter game mode. Yeah, okay. And one of the first things we did was, you start in your base, you're safe there, no one can kill you in your base. You need to leave your base, and then you could die. Yeah. You collect your ghosts, and then you need to come back to your base to drop them off. Now, if you picture a square map, and you picture everyone in the corners, picture everyone going into the map, but never even approaching the middle, and staying all in their quadrants. They're never visiting the other sides or whatever. Yeah. Very boring game. Everyone just goes out, hunts some ghosts, goes back to the safety of my base. There's no risk. There's no interestingness. Yeah. It's just a dumb little farming game. So that didn't work. And then we had a great idea of like, what if we took the drop-off point from the player's base to the center of the map? That way everyone's got to hunt the ghosts, and they all have a reason for conflict to drive somewhere on the map. So that's a good like level design standpoint of like, learn, the game got so much better when we're like, I got to leave the safety of my base. Yeah. I got to hunt some ghosts on the way to the center place, which is not even maybe enough ghosts. I got to be adventure. Now I'm trying to fight the blue territory when I'm in red over here to, hunt that guy's ghost. But then with the center thing, people can camp there and try to kill people and hunt, or, adds more avenues for gameplay. So that's something of like, you got to have the trial of making those games and really collaborate and like iterate on them. You can't just take a game, or you can't like write down on a GDD. I hate GDDs. I have to write them at work. But
what is a GDD?
A GDD is a game design document, which goes over like the idea of a game. But I've never done this on my own games. I've always, I'm a programmer, so I have the idea in my head, and I'll just program the thing.
Yeah.
But when you have to make a document about the thing, whatever the document says the thing is probably wrong and probably bad. Like, you need to make the thing, try it out, and then be like, oh, this sucks. Let's change that. This was good. Let's keep this.
Okay.
But, like, you need that iterative process of the game. Like, games can't be written in pen on a piece of paper and then just given to a programmer and an artist to, like, make. Like, it's a process that needs to be refined and iterated upon. Game jams are a great place to learn how to make games. I guess we'll end it with that as this little ramble. But, like, if you want to learn how to make games, go to game jams. They'll accept any skill level at most game jams. I haven't heard of a restrictive, like, high-level game jam. Most of them, they're like, come by. Like, I was at a game jam one time, and for years, I'd made horrible games at game jams. I was just tired of making bad game jam games.
So, real quick, what is a game jam?
Oh, yes, a game jam is usually some sort of event where you are locked in an... Not, like, locked. They don't lock the doors. But you're supposed to, like, stay overnight and whatnot. It's usually a 24, 48-hour event. But you try to make a video game in that small amount of time.
Jesus, yeah.
So you try to make a small team within like an hour or two, grab some artists, grab some programmers, grab whatever else you might need, figure out the idea, start cranking it out. It's not a lot of sleep. You're probably getting about 6 to 8 hours in this 48-hour period if you're doing it right. But it's kind of the fun when everyone gets a little sleep high at the
absolutely.
1 and 2 in the morning of Saturday and Sunday night are pretty interesting, or Friday and Saturday. But game jams are a great, like, collaborative process. People just get in teams. They try to crank out a game. They're very, like, quick and dirty kind of thing. But like I said, you got to make a lot of games to, like, figure it out. I made a bunch of game jam games, and they all sucked. And I finally was like, all right, there usually is a theme for the game jam, like make the game about this.
Okay.
And I was like, all right, screw the theme on this one. We're making a top-down shooter because that's what I like. And it's called Don't Shoot Your Friends. And I just grabbed people and I go, we're making a top-down shooter, and that's what we're doing. If you want to be on my team, come join me. We got a handful of people. One of the guys we got was he wanted to be a writer. So he wanted to get into games with writing. He didn't have any experience, but he was just like, I heard about this game jam thing. I want to show up, and I'd like to do some writing. And I go, well, we're making a top-down shooter, and there's no dialogue in it. So we don't need a writer at all. You're welcome to go join another group, but I'd love a level designer. Would you like to do some level design? And he goes, I don't know how that works. I go, I'll teach it. It'll take 30 minutes. So I showed him Unity. I showed him how to place things around and set up some collision boxes. And I go, give me a map in a day.
Okay.
I go, you got all tomorrow, and I'll check in and whatever, but make me a giant map. And that's what he did. So I made the little top-down shooter stuff, and then writer dude that didn't do any writing, but he got to do some level design, came in and made a pretty cool level. He did, like, I was like, oh, this is, like, pretty good, man. Like, he had cool little areas. He had the farm area. He had the little temple. He had the thing in the, like, had, nice variety to it. Had some story to it, too. So that was cool. But, yeah, you got to make a lot of games if you want to learn how to make them. And collaboration and iteration are great.
Okay, so it sounds like the advice for anyone looking to design games is just do a lot of it. Get your reps in. Just practice and practice and practice. Except it's going to be shitty for the first a lot of them.
Yes.
But just practice and practice and practice.
Yes. No, like I said, I was lucky with my school that we probably made 20 crappy games. Like, I think my first real, like, game I made in, like, an engine was, there's these things, there's like a swap meet. I don't know if you've ever, like, they're a little maze in a box, and it's got a pebble in it or something.
Okay,
and you go like, I tried to make one of those as a video game with physics. Horrible idea. It's so hard to do the physics of that from scratch. But that was like a dumb game. I'm like, oh, this will be cool. No one wants to play that on a video game. That's a dumb idea concept. So yeah, you got to get your reps in.
Okay. That's good to know. So we talked a lot about like the video game aspect of such, but there's a plethora of other games. What about board games? What does it take to make a good board game?
Board games are something I've been dabbling in recently. I'm trying to play with that. I think it's cool of the 3D printers are around now. Yeah. So that's kind of like a game engine for board games or whatever. I think board games are interesting of the I have a thing of, I don't know, I'm 25. So when I grew up, all the cartoons I watched as a kid, like Yu-Gi-Oh! Or this show called Chaotic or whatever was everyone carried around a pack of cards in their back pocket and you challenge people to some game on the streets. And I want that to be what board games are. It's cool playing big things like Dead by Day or not Dead by, what's the winter zombie one? A lot of bigger board games like Catan or whatever. Yeah. Those board games are fun, but I've always kind of wanted something you can bring with you all the time and challenge people to. I don't know, Bakugan was something like that. Yeah. I don't want to make that or whatever, but I think that idea is cool as board games. But board games are a lot different than video games from what I found so far. I've just video games are kind of easier to make in that if you do know how to program and you know how to get art, you can just make it on your computer, and you can just upload it to the Google Play Store, the iOS Store, Steam or whatever. Board games are a little tricky because, you got to make all the stuff for it. So, you got to get more into like manufacturing and distributing, which I really don't know much about yet, and I'm still learning about. But you would think they'd be very similar industries, but they're slightly different in the way that, I think video games can break through and get stuff out a lot quicker. Board games are a lot, you got to have a lot more time with them. They take even probably longer to make than a video game because, even as a video game, you can, make a little alpha and you can put that online on itch.io and you can try to put that on social media and you might get 500 people that might play your game. But getting 500 people to play a board game and give you feedback, that's a whole other
real hard
thing. So it's a lot more of a involved process, I think, to make a board game.
Yeah. What are some of the takeaways that you've learned by, making a video game and making a board game? What are some things that you discovered along the way that you didn't really know from the onset?
It's definitely, you learn a lot of things along the way. It's a lot of little things of like what work and what don't. It's definitely like, my first game, Dungeon Reels, I learned I'm not very good at monetizing mobile games. I'm not a big fan of the monetization of the mobile industry anyways. But like one little mistake I did was like Dungeon Reels was a game that was very easy to make new sets for people to play with. So the sets were pretty small. There were only a couple abilities, so it's pretty easy to make some new abilities and try to sell those as, more gameplay options to here's a new way to play. Here's a paladin set, here's a warlock set or something. But going through that, I found a thing of in most mobile games, you have some sort of currency you can get for free, and then you have some sort of paid currency. I was like, that's dumb. We'll just have a free currency, and you can buy that or you can earn it. One of the things I found was people like playing the game too much, that they hoarded so much of the free currency after buying I had a starter pack in the game that for $13 you just get everything in the game and unlocks everything. But then I wanted to sell more sets after that. So on top of the $13, I tried to sell you another 6-pack set and then another 6-pack set. Okay. But the first 6-pack set did pretty well. And I was like, oh, sweet. I can crank these out. This is a way to monetize the game more and keep it alive, keep it fresh. But I came up with the second one. Everyone had earned so much of my in-game currency that when I launched this thing, they just bought it for free and I didn't make any money. And I was like, oh, okay. So that's what balancing a game economy is all about, of making sure they can't buy that thing you want them to spend real money on, or, that kind of stuff. So little things like that. There's also more just gameplay stuff of what works and what doesn't. What things are cool, Dungeon Reels Tactics. I had a cool mechanic I liked that was fate cards. Which was in the first Dungeon Reels, I took the events that Slay the Spire had of just little narrative, little things with some options, but those weren't that interesting. I wasn't very good at making them interesting. So with Dungeon Reels Tactics, I scrapped that, and in between the fights, I wanted some sort of other mechanic to kind of influence your party stats and gear and whatnot. And so I really like the idea in roguelikes of you got to pay for a buff, or you can get a buff, but you got to pay for it. Either way of roguelikes are interesting of that, if you want to be good at this, you got to subtract in that, and that's how you can kind of move in one direction or build your character or something. Yeah. So Dungeon Reels Tactics, I made the fate card system, which was you would get dealt out an X amount of cards, and you got to pick any one, but each one had a cost and a buff with it. So you got to pick your poison to a degree. Yeah. So you always had to pick some sort of poison, but it came with some sort of buff. And some poisons were rougher than the buff they applied, and some buffs were better than the poison they applied, kind of thing. But I like that concept for roguelikes, and just overall of the give and take of that kind of system, I think is interesting.
How do you go about balancing difficulty for games? Because if you make it too easy, there's no challenge and it's not rewarding for a player to play things. But if you make it too hard, the player's then just bashing their face against the desk or the computer monitor or whatever, and it's not enjoyable at all.
That's what I've been I think I've been probably studying that most recently in my game design of the I do a lot of roguelikes. So roguelikes are usually hey, make it pretty easy at the start, and every time they beat it, you make it a little harder with ascension levels, or kind of the thing of the I beat the boss, now I can beat the boss with difficulty modifier 1, or then I beat the boss and I beat it with difficulty modifier 2. Yeah. Whatever those kind of modifiers are. But I think that's a pretty good starter way to do difficulty, because it starts easy, and as the player, interacts with the game, they get the difficulty they're looking for. Yeah. And some people want to start, hard, like an Elden Ring game, or, Dark Souls, kind of Souls-like games. But the one thing I like, Like even still to this day, like I still play Skyrim. Kind of more like in a masochistic sense, maybe of the like I don't even like complete the game anymore. I just kind of mess around with it. But I played around with like Legendary on like a Skyrim game or even like Oblivion. Bethesda's horrible at balancing their gameplay or
it's
their difficulty.
atrocious.
I think
It's just not good
because it just becomes the health bars are just gigantic and everything hits you so hard. Like there's nothing really interesting about playing that way. It just makes you min and max more in a game, and I think something like Baldur's Gate 3 makes min and maxing more interesting on heroic mode. That's still fucking brutal as shit. I don't know how to beat that yet, but my bashing my head against the wall in like Skyrim Legendary mode has learned a lot. Like, if you do want to scale difficulty, you need to kind of really understand the sandbox that is your game. And I think sandboxes are a really good way to look at games going forward. At least in the most recent history, sandboxes games have done the best. And by sandbox, I mean kind of games like Elden Ring, Breath of the Wild, and there's some other examples. But I think those games are really good at that. The industry has kind of learned that what games do really well is give the player a bunch of tools and give them a sandbox to go use these tools to go solve problems in and have a variety of things to do for them. So like, let's say they take to one part of the game and that solves a certain amount of problems. Let them go interact with that part of the game and solve those sort of problems. But knowing the sandbox you're working with then lets you actually make the difficulty more interesting. And like, let's say I haven't played Breath of the Wild or like Elden Ring or whatever. Like the earlier bosses are more simple as you're like getting across the mechanics, but then you're starting getting more interesting weapons and companions and sort of like combos or strategies you can start utilizing that lets you play at a harder difficulty because you now have a new like mechanics to leverage or you're not like pushing through. And so you want to have something that if you are going to make a game more difficult, it can't just be scaling up the numbers. You got to understand the playground and know how to, make different levels of the playground. Like you need to have the easy baby end of the playground. You need to have a more, there's no master expert level of playgrounds or sandboxes, but you need to have that level of the toolbox that the player has needs to be leveraged in the right way on the different difficulties, or it doesn't work. Then we just get Skyrim bullet sponges or whatever and that kind of stuff, and that's not interesting. You want to have something that either add more mechanics on the difficulty that the player has to deal with, or make them leverage their own mechanics more interestingly to fight the difficulty of like, let's take like a zombie game of the game is just shooting zombies. Okay, well, let's say if you want to play on the harder difficulty, you got to shoot them in the head.
Okay.
So the same game, but I go, okay, we all need to make sure we're making our headshots if we're going to play on the harder difficulty.
Yeah.
So you got to think of those more kind of, I think that's a better way to approach difficulty. Skyrim could have had a thing. All right, fuck it. Shoot them all in the head. That's how you deal more damage. I don't get like, that would have been more interesting if Legendary had like, if they put a headshot mechanic into the game and then leverage that on their Legendary difficulty, it'd be like, Legendary difficulty is about getting headshots. I think they just made Legendary difficulty hard as shit, but they didn't have like a reason why. So you got to have those sort of intentions with everything.
Okay, that makes sense. How do you feel about video games having one set level of difficulty? Like Elden Ring does not have an easy mode. You just play it as is because this is the developer's wish in how you experience the game. Versus, I don't know, let's look at Halo. You can choose between one of, I think, 4 or 5 different difficulty levels.
Yes.
What's your take?
I think there's a couple things of like, I think video games should make whatever difficulty they want, but there are kind of like industry standards of like, Elden Ring could have had a difficulty of easy, medium, hard, but that might not have been what they were going for. Like roguelikes usually don't have difficulty multipliers either. Like I said, they start easy and they get harder as you go. So, Souls-like games are asking people to get a challenge, so I don't think they need to make difficulties. Now, if you want to make a more approachable Souls-like game that add a difficulty modifier, make it easy so that I don't have to, crazy grind a boss for a week to like beat it. But it is kind of, again, I think this is something of like, video games are maybe skewing to maybe make it for like the player can make their own experience to a degree. Like that's something with like Baldur's Gate. You can even like edit the difficulty to whatever degree you want. A game like RimWorld, you can play it super easy. You can play it super hard.
Yep.
These kind of games that are getting to kind of like a board game on crack, but building this sandbox of tools and mechanics and things for the player to interact and play with. And then let them customize their experience however they want. Like I like RimWorld that, will let me just, add whatever animals I want to my tribal start because I'm like, I just want to do farming. Like,
exactly.
I'm like, I get it. There's like technology and guns and stuff, but like, I kind of want to make a farm and we're going to make drugs, and that's what I'm doing in RimWorld.
Yeah.
So I think moving towards, defining your player sandbox and making interesting sandboxes is a good place for the industry to move to, or at least that seems to be what, catches fire the most right now.
Okay. Do you have a favorite video game or a genre or an IP?
Dragon Age might be my all-time favorite. I'm a big fan of those games. I wish they made them more. I'm waiting for Dragon Age 4, but I don't even know if that's going to come out, and I wouldn't even like the last one that much. But I really like party-based, turn-based games. I'm really just a big RPG head. I get like ADHD with playing different RPGs. I got to play every variation of class and character before I pick one. But yeah, I'm big into strategy games and party-based RPGs. I really like... I don't know what it is about party-based RPGs. I don't know if it was the story of Dragon Age Origins that got me in, because Dragon Age, the story of that game gets a little dark. I played it when I was 14 or 15 too, so it was a little early, but it's a cool game, very mature, M-rated. But yeah, I would put Dragon Age Origins at the top, but I grew up playing a lot of Halo and Gears of War with my dad. It was also I was in 3rd grade playing Gears of War, which I think is funny in that game. They yell out, "Eat shit and die," and I'm in 3rd grade yeah, Dad, this is cool. I'm a chainsaw this guy. Look, but I don't think it had any impact on my development.
Yeah, no, none whatsoever. I feel like back then, at least mid-2000s, Xbox Live was a verbal blood sport, and you had to have such a thick skin just to get by.
Oh, yeah, no, I remember my buddies in junior, which even, we played a lot in, party chat. We weren't playing in, the actual, game chat a lot, but no, yeah, Call of Duty back in the day was pretty savage, but I have the opinion of, I don't get why people like League of Legends is a toxic community or whatever. I was kind of a trash talker with League. Maybe that's a bad thing, but I think video games to some degree they're not for kids anymore. Adults play video games. I am an adult, and if I want to have an adult experience on a video game with trash talking or whatever, that's fine. To some degree that comes with video games need to start managing their servers for under 18 servers and 18 above servers for rating reasons or profanity, whatever. But it's kind of we're not required to do that by law yet, so it's always at a game's discretion and what they're kind of going for. So
what is your favorite aspect to video game development? Is it messing around with the coding and the physics engine? Is it the stories? Is it making the art assets look nice and beautiful? What appeals to you?
I have a dumb saying that I like to summarize making video games, which is video games is just simulating alternate realities with math and logic functions.
Okay.
Which is all it kind of is, but there's a lot more to it.
Rolls right off the tongue.
Yeah. I like video games that reality doesn't exist in video games. It's whatever you want to make. So if I want to make exactly this world, but I go, fuck it, gravity goes up, I can do that in a video game. You can't do that in real life. And I was even joking today that all I want from a video game is I just want to shoot lightning bolts at the goblins. I don't want story. I don't just make shooting lightning bolts at the goblins cool, and you got me. That's all I need.
Yeah.
And so I like that video games, they don't have to follow any rules. So I'm definitely I don't like rules in video games. I like the, Rick and Morty approach of, I think that's so smart to be there are parallel universes and we can just move between them at any times, which means anything goes.
Yeah.
And that's where video games should be. Everything should go. Of the rule of cool, you should just make a more interesting reality than what this reality is. Because as much as I like this reality, I like games a little bit more. And so I like the idea of just trying to, transport the player to some other place that someone else has created or I've created, and just try to make a more interesting reality than what this is. It's fun to wake up and go to your job and drink water and eat food and whatever else is in life, but riding on a dragon and shooting fireballs at goblins is pretty tight too. I like that.
Yeah. I think there was a quote by one of your headmasters. It said, we take the work really seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously.
Yes.
What does that mean to you?
James Cardo, the headmaster of Academy of Interactive Entertainment, there, cool guy, very much liked him. But yeah, he had that quote of we take the work seriously, but we don't take ourselves seriously. Of video games is honestly it's a dumb thing to have very important discussions about. I even say I've decided all right, my life is just about making games, which is a preposterous, stupid thing to have serious discussions about. But what it kind of came down to with the take the work seriously, but don't take yourself seriously. Of you have to have such weird conversations in game dev of like, you have serious discussions on like if a button should be blue or green. Like there's an important reason, like blue and green mean different things based on the game or based on other contexts. So it can be like a relevant discussion, but it's kind of stupid to debate blue or green of a button. Same thing of like, I was working on a game at school and it was called Curse Breed. And someone on the project was like, oh, we should put titty physics in the game or like jiggle physics. And I was like, all right, cool. I'm the programmer on the project. I'll look into it.
Yeah.
So like at my school, it was a great school. We got to learn whatever. But I spent the day looking up jiggle physics, which is what it's called. And I looked up Wikipedia articles. And then I watched some YouTube videos of some games that had very nice jiggle physics in them. And, I learned about it and did the physics and hooked it up to our little, I talked to our technical artist that was rigging the boss, and I go, hey, I need a couple extra bones, up here, some clavicle bones, and give me some of those and put them in the right spot. I'm gonna put this physics on them, and working with them, we made we had this big little boss creature. It was female, so it had some boobs and a big old gut, and when it would move around, they'd flash, flip around, and it's a stupid thing to like, but it adds something to the game.
It does. It really does.
It brings the game more to life because you're like, well, that is a weird monster with, I guess, breasts and a big gut. Like, those things should jiggle and move as she moves around. So, like, one of the other thing with video games, it's all just smoke and mirrors. It's so much smoke and mirrors.
Oh, I'm sure.
Because nothing's actually real. We're trying to simulate as the least amount possible to do anything. We don't, Crazy thing of like, your little camera is just attached to your head and you're only rendering anything you can see in the world, and we do a bunch of smoke and mirrors of fake networking. You're not actually all in the same world together. That's not how it works. We're just faking data and sending it around and making it all look the same. The smoke and mirrors all around.
I think, that's something I didn't realize when I first got into, like video games and programming. Like you said, all smoke and mirrors. So let's take the looking thing. Like you have your camera and you have everything that you see in your field of view. Everything outside of that doesn't exist. It's gone. It is removed from memory. And as you look around, things page in where you're going to go see, and it gets removed on the side you're looking away from. Yeah. It's crazy.
No, yeah. It's also, like playing World of Warcraft. You're not like actually loading into this gigantic world they've created. They've got little chunks and you're in little zones and you're only getting data about the area you're in, but there's a couple channels that are global. Like, yes, it's all very like, because video games, there's so much stuff you have to do. Every little thing has to be done. I mean, even like VR physics are like seem like they're getting forward and progressing, but it's a lot of work to do all the physics of picking up a cup and holding it and dropping it and whatnot. So every little thing with video games has to be done. So when you can make a really good experience with all these smoke and mirrors, it's very impressive.
So on that note, what do you think is something that the lay person just doesn't know about video games and how they actually work?
Oh, there's like so much stuff of the like randomness would be like an interesting thing for people to learn how. Not the layman person knows how randomness works on a computer. Some people know of the like, no, nothing's actually really random on a computer. You take an initial value, you do some sort of algorithm on it that slightly modifies it to a semi-random result, and that is your random output, and you use that different input every time if you swap that up. So like, you take whatever the date and time is on the computer, because that changes every second, and then you pump that into an equation and you pump out a number. That's your random roll, and then you do some other fancy math stuff to make it fit in whatever bounds you're looking for. But like randomness is, again, smoke and mirrors a lot of video games. There's stuff of like nothing's actually pure randomness exists in video games, and it has its uses. But pure randomness is generally pretty bad at a lot of like. It's an okay approach at a ton of things. Just be like, oh, what map should we play? Pick it at random.
Sure.
And be like, well, if we pick it at random every time, and we're going to play 50 matches, and we only have 10 maps, what's the spread going to look like? Are we going to play the mountain map 25 times? And it'll be like, well, that's kind of annoying. Should you do pure random, or should you do like, oh, let's take one map, remove that from the list, and pull from all the other maps, and once we've picked all of them, then do it all. That's more of a like music player shuffle kind of thing, but there's a lot of different ways that randomness is approached in games, and as a player, you might not like, you're not going to have the access to what they're doing with the randomness, but it is pretty relevant. There's also, I don't know, layman like, like I said, also like video games are pretty big projects. I mean, people have heard, it's like 500 people to like do a project, which I even am like baffled on. I'm like, what the hell? How do you have 500 people to make a project? They're like, the UI is one person. Like one person can do the UI on like any video game. I'm talking like if it's a 2-year project, I mean, it depends on how much UI, I guess, but you don't need too many people doing the UI. So that's off the list. And like, animating, that's a big one. Animating's big on video games.
It's huge.
Probably, I don't even know if that's like the biggest thing in the industry, but as far as making high-end experience and making the bigger games, all that animation stuff is very, very expensive.
Speaking of animation, I thought this was hilarious. So Nikki has been playing a bunch of Dragon's Dogma 2. And, there's, when people craft things or cook food, there's usually some animation on screen. What they did is they just took real footage, like an actual steak being grilled with using a regular camera, and just filmed it, and then they just play that for the animation sequence. They don't have to, model anything. They don't have to create art assets. They just literally took a camera, a steak, and they grilled it, and that was it.
Yeah. No, it's creative stuff like that. If you can do in video games, that's a big part of like, what kind of cheap thing like that can we do to make all the content we need for like the least amount of effort?
Yeah.
That's something I think about a lot with making games. There's a great talk, I think it's a GDC talk, from the guys that made Rogue Legacy. I think they're two brothers. And their like philosophy of their studio is like, we go with the cheaper route. Or like, however we can approach the problem, let's do it cheaper.
Okay.
No, I'm sure they're not doing the zero budget option like I'm doing. I'm probably doing that a little too hardcore than them, but they at least are like, what's the creative solution? If it's, do we need to rig every single enemy? Or, I've always thought there's good tropes of like slimes, elementals, zombies, skeletons. These are all enemy types that we're all pretty familiar with, but they're very good in that like, chuck a different headpiece on the zombie, new enemy type.
Yeah, exactly.
Make a different colored slime, bada bing. Take the elemental and colorize it differently. You can find these things like that, and then if you go, instead of the one elemental enemy we had, we now, took the same model, made it 4 different colors. Now we got fire or earth, lightning, and water or whatever.
Yep.
And then, now we're like, they all have generally the same attacks, but let's give them all one unique attack.
Sure.
Not much work more than that single one of like, we were going to make one elemental with 3 attacks, let's say. But now we colorized it, so now we have 4 different models, and they all have basically the same 2 attacks. Maybe the second attack each has a unique status effect.
Yeah.
And then the third one's just a whole unique ability. Okay, well, that was a pretty easy way to get 4 unique enemies into our game.
Yeah.
Instead of being like, we need an elemental, a dragon, a reaper, and a, orc. You're like, okay, well, that's a lot of extra modeling, or, Yeah. So finding these creative things that lets you cut down on the workload for games is, I think, a big way to make all the big content and have this big blockbuster game, but, not have to do as much work, which I'm sure like Baldur's Gate probably did pretty well. Of the like, we just need generic humans of like, they probably just made some tool that generated human characters. And I think they even do something pretty smart in that game that like, if a character is uniquely named, I think they like exist in like the world in our tract to some degree, which is a very interesting thing that game is doing of like, well, no, we put Jimmy in Jimmy Town or whatever. Let's track where Jimmy goes. And they're like, maybe Jimmy goes to Bob Town every once in a while and talks to Bob. Like, that's an interesting thing for game to make it more live, which, I think Baldur's Gate 3 did very well.
Yeah.
And then I lost where the question was going again.
Oh, no worries. What do you think the role AI will play in video game development will be going forward?
Ooh, interesting. Lots of stuff, maybe. Most excited for that I've seen, which was a couple years ago, and I haven't seen anyone start. I haven't seen any cool demos or anything yet, but I know AI is working on like AI-based physics bodies. So if you're familiar with a game like Human Fall Flat or Gang Beast, it was soft body physics. So everything might move in that direction of soft body physics in the future, but with actual intelligent muscle control might be the way of like, so Human Fall Flat, you got like a bone in your soft body and you can kind of, pivot in certain direction, but you don't have full control over the whole skeleton.
Yeah.
But the whole skeleton reacts.
Yeah.
So that's the interesting thing about soft body physics. What I've seen is, I think they're working on is everything will kind of be soft body physics, but with the AI, and I don't even know how they fully do this, but I assume like every bone knows the physics it needs to do to behave properly. And that what I think they should be able to do is if they just take any 3D model and chuck it in VR and simulate it with whatever they call it, the magic VR soft body physics or whatever this tool is they call it. It should be able to do full interactions in VR. In that if I shove it like this, it should go like that. If I shove it in the shoulder, it should get shoved away. And then pivot back to its standing position if that's what it's supposed to do. Or, if I exceed the force threshold and the muscles can't counteract that within time, then he falls over. So I think they're working on that kind of stuff of much more, in VR games, we shouldn't have, static models like we're used to in, an RPG game where you can jump on it and teabag it and, run through it and do whatever or do a bunch of wacky stuff. Like when you do wacky stuff, their bodies will at least react. Yeah. Now, whether they have like personalities and the writing and the voice acting, how that kind of goes, well, that's probably going to be still rough for a while. It seems like they're getting close to faking real human voices with maybe not needing voice actors.
Yeah, it's getting really close.
When it's very cheap to have everyone in your game voice act, that adds a lot more tools to developers. Of voice acting is pretty strong when you are trying to make that experience or story related thing. Just reading dialogue doesn't have that same feel,
right,
as hearing the characters talk and have all the voice acting dialogue. So I think with AI, at least as far as like gameplay wise, that players are going to see, that kind of stuff might be big in VR. Or like, I never thought VR was interesting when I was in school, which was around like 2017, 2018. Okay. VR was just kind of popping up, but it wasn't that interesting yet. And it's still it's getting there, but it's still got a pretty long ways to go. But if they're going to have that kind of stuff, that opens up a lot to like actually having interesting, melee combat or, if you actually punch the guy, he reacts kind of,
Yeah.
It's definitely, they've already done the models of, when they run the simulations and that you can see the AI like not know how to walk. And then it's, after 1,000 iterations, it learns how to walk. So that stuff will be really cool when it makes it in. There'll probably be some stuff too of like AI generated art. That'll probably come down to, like, I don't know, player icons. That's probably not going to be done by people much longer. So that's going to be AI generated. Like whatever you can point towards like flash art in a game or something, AI is probably going to start doing that. So it might lower which is also like stuff you could probably find on a art asset online. So it doesn't like change it too much. But that and like coding might get kind of quicker, but I don't even know how much AI is going to take over coding. Like some person probably needs to oversee the thing at some point, but one programmer might be able to do what 3 could before in the next few years, which will also be great for games. We can just do more stuff, which is what it comes down to of the like, I feel like there's a weird blend of, indie and AA get to take more risks and do cooler stuff, but AAA is, very high end on the technology things. I mean, they are established in that like they have fully, voice acting rigged models and mocap and like they're set up for all that stuff. Indie and AA don't get to do that, so they don't get to play with those tools.
Right, that makes sense.
But, if they could meld those together, a very interesting or AA idea got the, assets that a AAA company did, which happens from time to time.
Yep.
But that could be interesting.
Okay. What's one of your favorite or most memorable moments from gaming? Whether a positive or negative experience.
Oh, I mean, I'll give like maybe not a negative one, but an interesting one that at least taught me something about making games or how people react to games. The game Hearthstone is a card game on mobile, and it has pretty decent RNG aspects as a card game, which I think is very interesting. Video game card games. Because like a normal card game, me and you, if we want to play a card game here, we got to like bring all materials and whatever, and there's only so many things we can do with, a table and physical space or whatever. But, video games can you spawn things out of nowhere. So like, oh, we need a banana for the game. The video game can just poop out a banana, and now we have a banana to use in the game. But we would have to have a banana in the fridge or go get a banana or something if we needed that. So yeah, if we needed a banana to like play a card game or something, that would be something. But with like Hearthstone, with how much randomness it has, I had a buddy growing up, like right when Hearthstone came out, we both started playing it, and he like could not handle the randomness that was in that game. Like something random would happen in the game, and he would be like, "This is fucking BS. The game's cheating me all the time. I know it's cheating me. The randomness shouldn't come out like this." I'm like, dude, I'm pretty sure it's random. Like, I think it's just straight random.
Like true random.
Straight randomness is a little too bad sometimes.
Yeah.
But like, it's better to ping pong between feel good random and bad random than to have pure random. But that was at least an interesting, like when I was like, man, he really has a negative reaction to this random stuff, which I'm sure a decent amount of people have. I don't, so I like randomness and I like putting it in games, but that kind of just taught me like, well, some people don't like randomness, and that's, not for them. As far as like, I don't know. I played video games most of my life of like before like elementary school. I got up early and played like Star Wars Battlefront a couple games before I went to school.
Fantastic, yeah.
Yeah, so I have a lot of memories like that. I've just had the Game Informer magazine, so I just played demos a lot as a kid of like playing a bunch of games. So just kind of played them all my life, and some of them hit that heart chord, and some of them haven't. I played some good games and some bad games. Like one of my favorite games ever, besides the Dragon Age games, was Lord of the Rings Conquest, which was just Star Wars Battlefront, but Lord of the Rings. Amazing game. Christ, did I play that game. Me and my buddy played that for hours and hours. It's the one game that, like, I'll buy a 360 in that if you got a swap meter. So, like, I would love to play that game again. But something about, like, the games that just have that core gameplay loop that I can get lost in are, like, what are great. Like, I don't get lost in the story and as much, but I want to have that good time shooting lightning bolts at goblins, and if you can sell me that experience, that's what I'm looking for.
I mean, even going back to my experience, like I must have put Jesus, I don't know, 4,000 or 5,000 hours into RuneScape growing up.
Yeah,
with really, really shitty graphics, and most of the gameplay is you click something, you go whack. Whether it's like you said, you whack a tree to get wood, you whack a stone to get, I don't know, iron ore, or you just whack a person.
But they made it interesting enough with the progression of they're like, I'm really good at hitting things with two-handed weapons. I don't do that scimitar or that bow and arrow stuff.
Know.
Or like, I'm really good at mining. I don't know how to cook or nothing. Like, and that also brought up other things. Like, yes, the core gameplay was pretty lackluster in that game. Like, so there are things like you can have a bad core loop and still have a good game. I go, it'd be better if it was more interesting.
Right.
RuneScape as like a top-down shooter with really cool mechanics, and everything else would be really cool.
Yeah.
But with that low core loop of like, you just click on stuff, you click on the goblin and attack that, or the dragon, or you're harvesting. It's just killing a mob or harvesting something.
Yep.
But with that other interaction of like, I guess there wasn't a world to an experience, and there were quests to do, which gets on that experience route. But how depth of an experience was RuneScape? Just reading dialogue and go. They had some cutscenes or whatever, but it wasn't the most riveting, world to dive into. But they did have the interesting player economy aspects of the, trading of the auction house, of the like, I can be a really good miner and I can use that to fund all my other skills that I'm not good at. So like, there is something of like the core loop. Sometimes maybe isn't even the like actually playing the game. It comes into the more like, what am I doing? Like, what are you thinking about? Like, I even think about like city building games or just kind of placing buildings, but more the fun is like, oh, where do I want to place okay, I'm going to set up my little bakery over here. And I'm going to do industrial stuff over here. And I'm going to do the housing district over here. But it's fun to come up with that stuff. Like, city builder games don't make it like super interesting to slap down a building. It doesn't fall from the sky and explode. Like, you could make all that stuff more interesting. Like our game Buoyancy we made. People just thought it was fun to play stuff because our game was a city building game on the water, so everything kind of floated. Mm-hmm. When you play something, it would fall from the sky and kind of bob into place. And so if you just placed a bunch of stuff, it was very funny to just watch them animate and whatever. So that's like a good thing of making those core loop stuff feel good, but you can have all that other stuff of either planning around what you're going to do with the core loop, which is a good thing, which I think some games, it's hard to build that too. That's a difficult mechanic to do of like, it's not even playing the game, it's the planning your character of RuneScape or planning your city.
Yeah.
What are you going to focus on? What are you going to spend your time doing? Because there's so much to do and you can't do everything. So you got to pick a lane and then, do the other aspects of the game. If I got to trade or I got to do this other quest to boost it or something, But yeah, RuneScape, good game.
Do you have a particular genre of game that you like to play?
Genre. So that's one thing I've been trying to find a new genre because like I play a decent variety of games, but what I've been kind of scratching the itch or I haven't really found is something that's like I know this is like everywhere, but I haven't found something that I like that scratches the itch. But I want something that's like a small, short to play like multiplayer game that I can like. It's not like I play like RimWorld and Skyrim and Baldur's Gate and like other games that like play it. I just play them over and over and over again. I'm like tired. I'm like, I need something quick. Like I like game like League of Legends that like I was into of the like, You get to kind of, it has that mastery. You get to learn how to play. You get to like
Yeah.
get good at it and play it over time. But they're too long. I don't want to play
45 minutes to, just have your teammate throw for you.
And it's weird that there's not even like, it's kind of like, I'm okay with something kind of niche, but I do want something that's, alive and popping to a degree. But there's nothing really out there that has the like strategy or gameplay itch I'm looking for that has like under 15-minute matches. And like, I'm not a battle royale guy of the like Hearthstone Battlegrounds is like maybe something comparable of like, I want to kind of turn-based strategy, but like high strategy kind of game like that you can just grind out and play and has kind of that setup like League of Legends or something that has that like new characters coming out or progression that like switches this up, which I feel like people have been kind of trying in the game industry with certain things, but I haven't seen that yet. So it's been something I've been like itching for. If I want that, I don't want to play a shooter and I don't want to play a co-op thing. I want some sort of one-on-one, like a chess type game. But what's the video game of chess that like League of Legends or like those MOBAs of kind of entering that space, but too long kind of thing?
Right.
I want something in that shorter range, which I guess doesn't answer the question of what games or genre I like, but that's a new genre that not a new genre, but like the type of game I've been looking for and weirdly hasn't quite existed. I know variations of that exist. There's some short of 15-minute multiplayer game I could find, but not something I don't even want something too like fast paced. I like something that I can just like as a timer, but like, I like more strategy. I don't know. What was the thinking games? Like not even like puzzle games or whatever, but I like a game, something like chess where like, it's not who can click or shoot quicker. It's who had the better strategy in the thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, someone can make some sort of fantasy chess game. That's right. Or like, I know they have like auto battlers and team fight tactics. I guess maybe I need to try these games, but none of them have like scratched exactly what I'm looking for.
I know what you mean, and it's so hard to find. Like, you don't know until you try it. Like, at least for me, like going from genres, I've bounced all over the place because I used to play a lot of Halo. Played, that was just the thing you did in the early 2010s or late 2000s. A lot of Halo. I mentioned RuneScape. I play a lot of StarCraft now. I used to play a lot of League of Legends, and then I just got tilted off the face of the earth for too long, and then I just stopped. But yeah, you're right. Each of them, they scratch a different itch, and you kind of go through seasons and what your tastes are, and those evolve over time.
Mm-hmm.
So, Kobey, a closing tradition that we have on the show is the previous guest leaves a question for the next guest, and they don't know who they're leaving the question to or for. So the question left for you is, learning can be a really fun experience. So what is something that you would want to unlearn just so that you can learn it again?
Oh, okay. Unlearning something to learn it again. Programming's fun. As much as it would suck to learn programming again, like I don't want to lose my knowledge of programming, but learning how to program again would be fun because learning, like, I don't know, programming, you get the dumb, like, I'm an idiot. This is so hard. I don't know what I'm doing. Like, this is so difficult. And then you solve something and you're like, I'm a fucking genius. I'm like, I
knew it all along.
I know everything. So that up and down of programming is when I still love it because it's still fun when I'm dumb. Like, why doesn't this work? I'm running it over and over. And then I'm like, oh, I forgot this dumb little thing or I go like, man, how would I do this? Oh man, this is stuck. And I've been like stuck on problems for weeks or even months when I'm not really like actively working on stuff. And just like, oh man, how do I want to do this thing, but I don't know how to do it yet. And then finally it hits you and you're like, okay. If I do it like that, okay, maybe it works like this.
Yeah.
And so I would go with programming just because, programming, if there's a runner's high, there's a programmer's high. And it's so much more destructive, but it's very good.
Oh God. I mean, I have a computer engineering degree, so I've done a fair amount of programming. And like you said, like the highs are so high, but the lows are so low. You're smashing your face against the keyboard for, like you said, weeks or potentially months on end. You search online for forums for like really obscure stuff. You're on like page 7 of Google just hoping to find that little shred of information that's going to change it for you.
With ChatGPT of the, like, I don't think you got to comb through Stack Overflow anymore. I think ChatGPT does it for you now.
Crazy stuff. I mean, I lived by Stack Overflow. like the legends that would then post their question and their problem, figure out some solution, and then respond to their stuff with the actual solution. I think the most disheartening thing I've ever experienced is you find an ancient thread from like 12 years ago of your exact problem, almost to the word. And then you start scrolling through the replies. And then the last one that you see is just, oh, never mind. I figured it out. Thanks.
Yeah.
With no solution. You're like, what did you see? Tell me. Yeah. I mean, programming is just, yeah, I understand why you would want to learn it again. I understand the experience that you're going through.
No, I think I felt very proud when I felt comfortable of like I can now work in Unity and I don't need to look up everything I need to know how to do on the forum. Like I know how to do everything. I look on the forum when I get stuck on something, which is great. Like when you first learn a game engine or something, you can be checking the forums and Stack Overflow. You're like, how do I make an array of things or a list or whatever dumb thing you're trying to do? But then as you get better, like, yeah, you learn more. And yeah, I don't have to Google as many questions when I work in Unity as I used to, which is nice.
Yeah, there's also some like really weird programming stuff like, oh, how do you kill all your children? And it's explaining like how a process, removes all the sub processes behind it, or like, what was another one? Like just a bunch of like master-slave relationships because you have this thing that then controls this thing. There's a bunch of weird programming things.
We have that too in just general like video game development. The term is called you need to kill your babies. So if you make video games, you're supposed to be okay with killing babies, which is not the most appropriate term. But the concept is that you might have an idea that you're like, oh my God, this game's so cool, I want to make it. But if it sucks, you need to learn how to, take the baby out back and put a bullet in its head and move on to the next one. It's horrible to shoot babies, but when you're making video games, you got to kill the baby. Because that's the thing, you got to test the project, and it might be a cool idea, and you build it, and you're like, man, this sucks to play. Like, this is not good. Like, so either learn how to make it good, or you just got to move on to the next thing. And so some people get stuck on a project, and that's no good. You got to kill the baby and move on if it's no good.
Like all creative efforts, like it's a living thing, and you don't know how it's going to develop and turn out until you start working on it and, get some headway on making that project happen.
Yes, make some games, get them in front of people, see how they feel, get good, honest feedback. That's also what honest feedback is hard. I always think people are lying to me. They're like, I'm just like, tell me my games are bad.
All right, Kobey, it's been an absolute pleasure. Before we go, is there any message that you'd like to put out into the world?
I don't know. Making games is cool. It's not that hard. You can get into it. It is hard, but it's rewarding and it's cool to do. And I don't know. Yeah. Make games. Games are fun for people.
Love it. Thank you. Kobey, thank you so much for being on the show. It's an absolute pleasure to have you.
Yes, pleasure being here.